At 87, I finally admitted the thing that broke my heart. My children only call when they need money. I gave them everything, and somewhere along the way, I became a bank instead of a mother. If a name just came to your mind, comment one word, same. You are not alone tonight. And if you know a parent being treated like this, share this with them. Sometimes they just need to hear they're not crazy. Here's the moment I finally saw the truth. The call came on a Thursday evening in March of 2023. I had not heard from Sandra in 6 weeks. I know the precise interval because I had been counting. Not out of resentment, not yet, but out of the quiet arithmetic that mothers do when they are trying to understand something they do not want to understand. 6 weeks is not a long time in some relationships. Between a mother and a daughter, it is a long time. Between a mother and a daughter who lives 40 minutes away and who has 2 children of her own, whom that mother has never once turned away from, 6 weeks is long enough to notice. When Sandra called, she was warm. That is important to say. She was not cold, not transactional in her tone, not anything you could point to and call evidence of something wrong. She asked about my knee. The knee had been bothering me, which she knew because I had mentioned it 6 weeks earlier in the last conversation. And the fact that she remembered it and asked about it first seemed, in the moment, like evidence of her consideration. We talked for perhaps 12 minutes. The children were fine. Her husband was traveling for work. Things were busy, the way things are always busy for people in their 60s who have not slowed down yet. Near the end of the call, Sandra mentioned a problem with her car. The repair estimate was $800 and she was a little short this month. She was not asking exactly. Sandra never asks exactly. She mentions. She describes the situation in enough detail that the shape of what she needs becomes clear. And then she waits. I have known this shape for 60 years. I recognized it before she finished the second sentence. I said, "Of course, I'll transfer it tomorrow morning." She said, "Thank you, Mom. You're a lifesaver." And then we said goodbye and the call was over. And I sat in my kitchen with the phone in my hand. What I felt sitting there was not anger. I want to be accurate about this because I think the accuracy matters. It was not anger and it was not resentment in any form I recognize. It was something quieter and more difficult to name, a kind of tiredness that had nothing to do with the hour. The tiredness of someone who has been carrying something for a long time without calling it by its name, and who has, in this moment, finally seen what it is. Sandra was not the only one. Sandra is the oldest, and the pattern with Sandra is the most established. But it runs through all 3 of my children in different forms. Kevin is 58, lives in another state, calls about 3 or 4 times a year. The calls follow a recognizable shape, brief warmth, life update, underlying purpose. Kevin's purposes tend to be larger than Sandra's. Kevin thinks in larger numbers, always has. Michelle is 55, the youngest, and for a long time I told myself Michelle was different. Michelle calls more often. Michelle asks how I am. But even with Michelle, in recent years, I have started to hear the shape beneath the warmth. The way you eventually hear the structure beneath the music when you have listened long enough. I worked as a registered nurse for 38 years. Pediatrics first, then general medicine, then the last 12 years in home health, going into people's houses, caring for them in the places where they actually live. I understood professionally and thoroughly what it means to be someone whose purpose is to provide for others. I had organized my entire working life around the idea that what I had to give was the most important thing about me. This was not a philosophy I had chosen consciously. It was the water I had been swimming in since I was old enough to swim. My own mother had been the same way. A woman who had grown up in circumstances that required giving everything and asking for nothing, who had passed that pattern on to me, not as a lesson, but as an atmosphere. You absorbed it the way you absorbed the smell of the house you grew up in, not aware of it as a smell until you have been away long enough to notice its absence. I did not question whether it was the right way to be a mother. It was simply how I understood the role. Gerald died in March of 2015. We had been married 52 years. When he died, the children were there, all three of them, present and attentive and genuinely sorrowful, and I was grateful for it. In the months after his death, I reorganized myself around them in the way that grieving people reorganize themselves around whatever is available. They were available. I poured into them the energy and attention and care that had previously been distributed between Gerald and the children and my work. And the pouring felt purposeful, felt like the right response to loss, felt like a way of continuing to be useful in a world that had just contracted significantly. I did not notice, as the months became years, that the reorganization had become permanent, that I had established in the years after Gerald's death a pattern in which I was consistently the one giving, and they were consistently the ones receiving, and that no one, including me, had thought to question whether this was how it should go. It felt natural. It felt like love. In many ways, it was love. But love and a pattern are not the same thing. And a pattern that goes unexamined long enough becomes invisible, even to the person at the center of it. The first time the word bank crossed my mind, I was standing at the window about a year before Sandra's call. After Kevin had mentioned in his way, his particular way of mentioning things, that he was having some cash flow difficulty with the venture he had started. I had said yes before he finished the sentence. After the call, I stood at the window and the word appeared, briefly, like something floating to the surface of water. I pushed it back down. The thought felt disloyal. The thought felt like the kind of thing a bad mother thinks about her children, and I was not a bad mother. I was a devoted one, and devoted mothers do not think of their children in terms of transactions. I have a friend named Norma. We have been friends for 40 years, which means she has known me through the full arc of my motherhood. Through the years when Sandra and Kevin and Michelle were small. Through the years when they were leaving. Through Gerald's illness and death and the years since. Norma raised 3 children of her own, and Norma's relationship with her children looks, from the outside, nothing like mine. Norma says no. That is the simplest way to say it. When one of her children needs something she cannot give, she says she cannot give it. And she says it without apology and without the elaborate explanation I always felt I owed when I occasionally, rarely, said no to mine. I used to think Norma was simply built differently than I was, more naturally able to hold a boundary. What I have come to understand in the last 2 years is that Norma was not built differently. She had simply made different choices consistently over decades, and those choices had built different relationships. I want to go back to the beginning of this, or as close to the beginning as I can get. Because I think the beginning is the part that matters and the part that nobody talks about, honestly. The dynamic I am describing did not arrive fully formed. It was built incrementally across 40 years, and I built it alongside my children. and we built it together without anyone deciding to build it. It grew out of choices that felt individually like the right choices, like what love does, like what a good mother does, and that accumulated over time into something that no individual choice would have led me to choose. I was, when my children were young, a mother who solved things. Gerald was steady and present, but he was not a solver the way I was a solver. When something went wrong, the children came to me. When Sandra failed her driver's test the first time and was devastated, I was the one who sat with her and talked her through it and made her practice every evening until she passed. When Kevin had trouble in his first job and nearly quit in the second month, I talked him off the ledge 3 nights in a row by phone. When Michelle's first marriage ended, I drove 4 hours to be there and stayed for 2 weeks. I was good at being needed. I was good at arriving and making things better. This is not a small thing, and I am not saying it with regret exactly. I am saying it because it is where the pattern began. What I did not do, what it did not occur to me to do, because it was not part of the model of motherhood I was operating from, was let them sit in the difficulty long enough to solve it themselves. Not out of cruelty, not out of neglect, out of love. Out of the particular form of love that cannot stand to see someone it cares for in discomfort, when there is something it can do to relieve the discomfort. The relief was real, and the relief was genuinely helpful in the moment. And the lesson that ran underneath the relief, accumulating year after year, was, when something is hard, Mom fixes it. By the time my children were in their 40s, Mom fixing it had expanded from emotional support to financial support as well. The expansion was gradual. A few $100s here when Sandra and her husband were stretched thin one month. A loan to Kevin when he was between jobs in 2011 that I did not think of as a loan because I did not expect it back and did not ask, and it was not brought up again. A contribution to Michelle's house down payment in 2014 because I had the money and she needed it, and giving it to her was a straightforward expression of love. None of these felt like establishing a pattern. Each of them felt like a specific response to a specific situation. In October of 2019, Kevin called to tell me about a business idea. Kevin had had business ideas before. He was that kind of person, always seeing opportunity, always at the beginning of something. And this one involved distribution or logistics or some combination of the two. And the details were not entirely clear to me, but the number was clear. He needed $14,000 to get started, and he could pay it back within 18 months, he said. I did not have $14,000 sitting in a checking account. I had it in a certificate of deposit that I had been carrying for 6 years, that Gerald had originally set aside as a specific kind of cushion. I liquidated it. I transferred the money to Kevin within a week of the call. Kevin called to say thank you. He was grateful and specific and warm, and he told me about the progress he was making, and I was glad to have helped. That was in October of 2019. The business did not materialize in the way Kevin had described it. By mid-2020, it was clear that it would not. Kevin never mentioned the money again. I never mentioned the money again. What I know now that I did not know then is that the silence about it was not Kevin protecting me from embarrassment. The silence was the natural result of a relationship in which money flows in one direction and is not discussed. because discussing it would require a kind of reciprocity that had never been established. Sandra's pattern is different from Kevin's in scale, but not in shape. Sandra calls when she is short, the car repair, a medical bill, a month when the expenses ran over. The amounts are manageable. What is not manageable, and what I only began to see clearly in the year before I am telling you about, is the gap between the calls that have a purpose and the calls that do not. In the 3 years between 2020 and 2023, I can count on one hand the calls from Sandra that were not connected in some way to a need. I know this because I wrote them down. That is the thing I am not proud of. I started keeping a record, a small notebook, because I needed to know whether what I was feeling was real or whether it was the distorted accounting of a lonely old woman who was not being fair to her children. The notebook told me it was real. Michelle. I want to speak about carefully because Michelle is different, and Michelle's situation is more complicated. Michelle calls more often than the other two. Michelle asks how I am and means it, I believe. But in the last 3 years, Michelle has also borrowed money twice. Smaller amounts, always repaid, which Sandra and Kevin do not do. And what I have noticed is that the calls cluster around the times of difficulty. Between the difficulties, there are longer silences. Not as long as Sandra's, but there. Michelle is the child I had hoped would be different. And in some ways she is. And in some ways, the difference is one of degree rather than kind. Here is what I have never done. Not once in the 40 years of my adult children's lives. I have never called one of them and said that I needed something. Not money. I have enough for my own needs. But the other things, the presents, the company, the Sunday dinner that used to happen and no longer does. I have never said, I am lonely and I would like you to come. I have never said, I need you to call me just to call me, not because something is wrong. I constructed, without intending to, a version of myself that had no needs that I would admit to, that was always fine, always managing, always grateful for whatever contact came my way. I gave them the impression, consistently, over decades, that I was a self-sufficient entity who required nothing from them except occasionally the opportunity to provide. Norma once told me, this was years ago, we were having coffee, and the conversation was only tangentially about this. She said, my children know what I need from them because I told them, not once, regularly, the same way I told them what was expected of them when they were 12. I remember thinking at the time that this sounded exhausting, saying what you need, repeating it, demanding consideration as a regular practice. I was not built for that. I was built to give and not to ask. What I understand now is that in not asking, I had been communicating something. I had been communicating that I did not need to be visited, did not need to be called for no reason, did not need the kind of presence in my life that I had given to them freely for 50 years. They had learned this from me. The lesson was clear, and I had taught it carefully over decades, without knowing that is what I was doing. Norma's daughter came to help her when her bathroom floor needed to be replaced last year. Not because Norma had money for them or because Norma was in crisis, because Norma had asked. And because Norma's children had grown up understanding that asking was a thing their mother did and a thing they were expected to respond to. The floor was fixed in an afternoon. They had dinner together. The daughter stayed for the weekend. I heard about this from Norma on a Monday, and I sat with what I felt for a long time before I was able to name it, which was grief. Not for the weekend Norma had, exactly. For the version of my own life in which I had built something different. My 87th birthday was on a Sunday in September of 2024. I had made a pot of soup the day before, a habit from decades of Sunday cooking, the habit of a woman who had spent 40 years preparing meals for people who would come. And I ate it alone at the kitchen table. This was not unexpected. I had not told my children I wanted them to come. I had not said anything about the birthday beyond what appears in the family group chat, which I had posted the week before. A brief mention that I was turning 87, with a small emoji that I added because that is what you do in a group chat when you want to seem like you are not sad about the thing you are sad about. Kevin called on Sunday afternoon. The call was 4 minutes. He was cheerful and warm, and he sang the first few bars of Happy Birthday in the way he has done since the children were small, which made me smile, which is what he intended. He said he had to get going, and I said, of course, and we hung up. Sandra sent a text message with a photograph of herself and her grandchildren holding a sign that said, Happy Birthday, Grandma Helen. And the photograph was lovely, and the children in it are lovely. And I looked at it for a long time. Michelle called the following Saturday. She apologized for being late, which she was, and we talked for 20 minutes, which was longer than the others, and she meant well, which she does. I sat in the kitchen that Sunday evening with the soup and the quiet, and I finally asked myself the question I had been not asking for the better part of 2 years. What did I teach them? Not what did I want to teach them, not what I believed I was teaching them when I was in the middle of teaching it. What did I actually teach them, and what do they know, and where did they learn it? Here is what I taught them, as best I can reconstruct it from the evidence. I taught them that I was always there and always available and always capable of providing what they needed. I taught them that asking was comfortable and that the answer was almost always yes. I taught them that I did not run out, did not hit a limit, did not need the giving to go in any other direction. I taught them by never asking for anything and by always being fine that I did not need to be visited, did not need to be called for no reason, did not need presence in my life the way they needed presence in theirs when they were small and I was the one providing it. I taught them over 40 years in the most thorough and consistent way I knew how that I was not a person with needs. I was a person with resources. I am not saying this to excuse them. They are grown adults with their own judgment and their own choices. And the choice to call your mother only when you need something is a choice, regardless of what patterns she established. But I have been angry at them for 2 years. Not dramatically, not in a way I have expressed, but a low, steady anger that sits in the chest. And the anger is easier to carry than what is underneath it, which is the knowledge that I participated in building this, that I had a hand in it, that the bank is partly something I constructed. What I wish I had done, and I want to say this specifically, not in general terms, because general terms are useless, is that I wish I had let them see me need things. Not the small needs. I mean the real ones. I wish I had called Sandra on a bad day and said, today was hard, and I need you to talk with me for a while. I wish I had told Kevin when he missed my 65th birthday because of a work trip that I had been hurt by it. I wish I had told Michelle when she went 3 months without calling the year after her divorce that 3 months was too long and I expected more from her. I wish I had been the kind of mother who said what she needed, who made demands that were not financial, who showed up as a full person rather than as a service. Not because it would have been easy, because it would have been true. And children who know what their parents truly need, not as a burden, but as a fact, grow into adults who think of their parents as people rather than as resources. I am 87 years old. I still make soup on Sundays. I still answer when they call. And I still say yes more than I say no. Because at 87, the window for building different habits is narrow, and I know it. But I am saying to you, whoever is listening to this tonight, the thing I wish someone had said to me 25 years ago when there was still time to do something different with it. If you are a parent, your children need to see you as someone who has needs, not as a burden, as a person who gets lonely, who wants to be visited, who needs the phone to ring sometimes, for no other reason than that they want to hear your voice. If you have been pretending not to need those things in order to seem strong, in order not to impose, in order to be the kind of parent who never asks for anything, you have been teaching your children that you do not need them, and they have learned it. And you cannot be angry at them for learning the lesson you spent decades teaching. And if you are a child, if a name came to your mind at the beginning of this and is still there, I want to ask you something directly. When was the last time you called for no reason? Not because something was wrong, not because you needed something, not because a birthday or a holiday required it, just because they are your mother or your father, and they are still here. And the time when they will not be here is closer than it has ever been. Tell me in the comments, in your family, who became the bank? And if it was your parent, are you willing to say so? Because the first step to changing it is being honest about what it is.